Hi, I'm the director for our New Zealand registered not-for-profit charitable trust, Common Knowledge, and our trust holds a concept that hundreds of fathers and mothers developed in the early 1970s, which is that it's normal and natural when pregnancy to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills, then use those skills to work through the activity of birthing your baby. And our trust also holds all of the Birthing Better online birth classes filled with the skills that fathers and mothers developed so that they could self-learn. Now, there are other skills-based methods. That's not our conversation today. But our conversation does wrap around this concept because that's not the concept that people are dealing with when they are pregnant, and nor have they been dealing with this since the early 1980s. But I am old enough to have birthed before the present choice-based trend. So in talking about fathers who've been traumatized by birth, I need to go back and tell you that around the world, throughout time, cultures deal with men differently about childbirth and pregnancy. There is no one way to do it. Yet every culture recognizes that pregnancy and having a baby is a family and societal issue. So most traditional communities have very specific prescribed behaviors that are attributed to the fathers to be. Modern countries lack those. So prior to when I gave birth in 1970 in the United States, fathers were not permitted to be in birth, and classically, they went to the pub or they sat in the waiting room and they handed out cigars, if you remember that. And women went into the hospital and we were left alone to birth. And in the 60s, women started just saying, no, that's not okay with us. We want our husbands to be with us. And the medical profession said yes. And it happened at the same time in the 60s and the 70s that the very first childbirth preparation classes were taught in the United States and in some other countries. And those classes were entirely skills-based. Lamaze and Bradley in the United States and Grantley Dick Reed. Bradley method was called husband or father coach childbirth. So this will tell you something. So we wanted husbands to be with us. We didn't want to be left alone to discover birth by ourselves. We were suffering in childbirth because all of us lacked skills to cope with the natural and normal and physiological pain of childbirth. The medical profession knocked us out as a pain relief. Cesareans were rare as hen's teeth, only to save a woman's life. And all of us labored, whether we had risks or not, and whether we had a tragic outcome or a good outcome, whether we suffered or coped, whether we labored for hours or days. So childbirth in 1970 was actually, the maternity system was really, other than the fact that women were going to the hospital and having all sorts of assessments, monitoring procedures, the maternity system did not have the sophistication that it has today. But what happened in my generation from the 60s to the mid-70s? Multiple millions. You need to hear that number. Multiple millions of mothers and fathers learned and practiced birth and birth coaching skills and used them in their hospital births. Sadly, as we've talked about in others of these series, Lamaze and Bradley and Grantley Dick Reed, three wonderful obstetricians, but what they did was they started to separate low-risk women from high-risk women. They made a mistake. They should have recognized that 100% of women give birth. They focused on outcome, a natural birth, pain-free labor with no medical care. They should have focused on the reduction of suffering, which is the lack of skills to cope with labor pains. And because they didn't do that, then what happened was the skills were inefficient to produce their desired results of a natural birth, pain-free labor with no medical intervention. but it would have been absolutely brilliant, and it actually was brilliant for multiple millions of mothers and fathers who used skills, and they didn't suffer as much. But because the announced goal was for the natural birth, the medical profession and birth advocates only saw that skills didn't achieve those three goals. They didn't pay attention to the fact that they achieved the lack of suffering, and that mothers and fathers began to work well together in birth. And this meant something, and this still has a residual something to you giving birth now. My generation of women and men in the United States felt empowered by their births. And their births were full of assessments, full of monitoring, full of procedures that are now called interventions. We didn't always have the best births, we didn't always have a good outcome, but we applied skills the best of our ability, and we worked together, which meant that the men participated in the hard work of birthing their children, and we worked together, which meant that after the birth, we were more likely to work together as a family with the issues that come from having a newborn in your family, even if it's your 20th child. And then something happened by the time I gave birth last in 1982. Those skills had disappeared because birth advocates dismiss the skills as not being able to achieve for low-risk women this natural birth, pain-free labor without medical intervention. They, once again, missed that 100% of pregnant women will give birth. Women want their partners with them if they can. Fathers want to have the skills to know how to help. And we almost had that in the 60s and 70s. We almost had that. It's just that the message was incorrect. It focused on low-risk women, natural birth, pain-free labor, rather than the lack of suffering. Fathers helped women not suffer. They helped women. What does not suffering mean? It means that we cope better. We manage better. We can work through the activity better. We can handle what happens in that activity better. We can deal with the internal sensations and the external factors going on around us better when we have skills. In other words, we birth better when we have skills. And when our partner works with us and can help us cope better, then we feel that he's very involved in something that we often feel we're doing by ourselves, which we are doing by ourselves, right? So every woman births alone. We do birth by ourselves, even if there are a million people in the room doing all sorts of things. We're the only one doing it. We can't stop for lunch. Nobody can take it on for us. But if we're going to be in a room with someone else, we have an expectation that they know how to help us cope. So what has happened since the 80s? The natural birth movement removed skills from childbirth preparation. Or maybe they're taught a little bit of breathing, a little bit of relaxation. But really the focus was on information in order to make choices and to make a birth plan. And fathers were actively reduced from being a birth coach to supporting women's choices. And it was actively done by saying, women shouldn't be told what to do, fathers shouldn't coach them. And so men, human beings, fathers-to-be, who are going to be fathers, partners, as human beings, they were reduced from having skills to basically just being there and standing around. Women know when their partner doesn't know how to help them. And men know when they don't know how to help them. We know. We all know. Right? And because I've been involved in this conversation for 50 years, and I gave birth in one trend and gave birth last time in another trend, and because the fathers and mothers who developed birthing better did so to reduce suffering, to reduce or prevent issues from becoming problems, problems from becoming tragedies, and they did so in order to have a set of skills that they could share together as a family that would strengthen their family through pregnancy, through birth, and into parenting. We all want to have empowered births. We all want to have a safe birth. We all want to have a positive birth, and none of us want to be traumatized by it. Once the choice-based trend became elevated, which it is today, and fathers were reduced to supporting women, and childbirth classes sort of dropped out all the skills, then what has happened is there's been this explosion of shame, blame, guilt, disappointment, frustration, anger, and birth trauma. And that birth trauma occurs for both fathers and mothers. So how, as a man, and if you're a woman listening to this, this is for you too. How, as a human being who happens to be a man, how do you prevent yourself from having birth trauma? Because you may not prevent the birthing woman from having it. However, you both don't need it. And if you work together, she's less likely to have it. This does not mean that you can come away from birth feeling la-di-da. It can be very traumatizing. But being traumatizing does not mean that you get left with trauma the rest of your life. All of us have had traumas in our life, and most of them we get over and get on with it. A few, for individual people, they linger and linger, and they have a huge impact on themselves and in their relationships with their children and with others. So as a man, how do you prevent birth trauma? You take very, very seriously this concept that when you are pregnant, self-learn birth and birth coaching skills, and then use those skills to help your partner work through the activity of birthing your baby. That is the best way to reduce or prevent your being left with being traumatized from the birth. Because when you are skilled in anything, all humans thrive on being skilled. And when you are skilled, and you are skilled in most parts of your life, and if you meet a challenge in any area that you have skills in, you use those skills. You adapt them and you adjust them. You make them sustainable. You don't happen to like the situation, but you apply your skills. And sometimes challenging situations gives you a mastery of the skills that you wouldn't have had without that challenge. So as a man, if you want to prevent being traumatized by birth, take that concept seriously, that it's normal and natural to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills in pregnancy, and then use those skills to help your partner work through the activity of birthing your baby, no matter where the birth occurs, no matter who's present, no matter the circumstances surrounding the pregnancy and birth, no matter her or your beliefs, no matter the choices that she or you may have, or the lack of choices, or the change in choices, or what happens to or around her and you and your baby at birth. It's an activity. It's going to start, and it will continue until your baby's born. It may start at home. You may then get into a car, drive to the hospital. She may get prepped, and then she may lie on a table while her belly's cut open. So use your skills on the way to the hospital while she's being prepped and during the surgery. It's your baby's birth. Use skills together to build your family and to reduce or prevent the potential for feeling overwhelmed, out of sorts, passive, helpless, useless, incompetent. You don't want to feel that way going into fatherhood. So if that's what your birth is like and that's how it ends, use your skills. If you labor and you labor at home and then you go to the hospital or your midwife comes to your house, this is your baby's birth. Use your skills. Why do you use your skills? Well, first, it's an activity, and all of us thrive on having skills to do an activity and having the right skills for the task at hand. Second of all, pregnancy and childbirth are so infrequent, and it leaves you with a baby for years, right? If you can work together in that birth, then it's less likely either of you will be traumatized, and it's more likely you'll work together and help each other not be traumatized. And if you are traumatized and you did work together, then you will help each other recover from this trauma. So as a man, that's your best way to prevent being traumatized in birth, is become skilled. Just recognize it's an activity. Here's a secret. No birth professional, whether they come to your house or whether you go to them, is ever going to stop you from using skills to help your partner cope and manage better. They'll praise you. They wish everybody did. So if you want to prevent being traumatized at a birth, become skilled and help her do the activity of birthing your baby. If, however, you didn't have skills and you are left being traumatized from your birth, this is going to sound crazy, but the best thing you can do is to learn skills and then go back in your mind's eye and apply those skills to the last birth. The human mind is incredibly unique. We don't know what whales and dolphins and gorillas and chimpanzees do with their cortex. We know what we do with ours. We can imagine something in the future that hasn't existed yet. That's why women make birth plans. And we can go back and replay situations in the past. And what do high-end athletes do when they are faced with the Olympics? They replay in their mind's eye the activity that they're going to do, because what they want to do is to make their skills automatic. And many athletes, they'll either pass the past back, or they will go back and replay it so that if the situation is a variation on the theme, that they will know how to apply their skills better. And if you learn skills after birth and go back and apply them in the birth, the situation may or may not have been the same. And yet you know that had you had skills, your behavior, your thoughts would have been different, and you probably would be left with less trauma from feeling useless and helpless. So that's a skill to use. I know a lot of people will go, well, why would you want to do that? Because you don't want to be left with the trauma. And so there are lots of ways to do it. And one way is to learn skills you didn't have and go back and apply them. And then you know, if you're in a situation again like that, you'll apply your skills. That's how we mature. That's how we grow. And that's how we reduce feeling useless and helpless and stupid and ignorant from a lack of skills. If you are traumatized from a birth and your partner is traumatized from the birth, if you and she can learn skills together and apply those skills to the memories that you had of that birth, then you can heal trauma from both of you. But there are lots of other ways to heal trauma, and you can heal your birth trauma with or without her help. You're a human being independent of her. You are parenting this child, not independent, but you are different people. And this child deserves a non-traumatized father, just as this child deserves a non-traumatized mother. Do women let go of trauma around birth? Some don't want to be frank. And some don't put in the effort to be frank. Because when we have a problem that we can tell people about and repeat that problem over again, we often become identified with it. And there are people, women and men, who cling to and hold on to their identity of being a traumatized person. However, if you want to change and you want to heal this trauma, then there are a number of skills that birthing better fathers and mothers develop to do that. They did that both alone and together. But I'm going to talk about it as an alone thing, because I'm doing this for you, and there's one on women who are traumatized by birth, so you can refer back to that. If you've been traumatized by your birth trauma could be really honestly any trauma. The only reason that we elevate it is because birth is infrequent. There are three really physiological functions: sex, hunger, and birth. I mean, going to the bathroom is and stuff like that. But giving birth, sex, and hunger. If we gave birth as frequently as we ate or as frequently as we had sex, we would be very skilled at doing this. Some more than others. I'm not a particularly good cook. I've cooked for years. My son is a much better cook. So is my daughter. I just didn't quite get that. But I'm not traumatized every time I cook. So you don't want to be traumatized by birth. So you recognize that the reason that people lack skills is that birth is so infrequent. So if you've been traumatized by the birth, you need to recognize there's a relativity. You could be at war. You could be living in Syria, or you could have been living in Iraq, or Vietnam, or Europe during the Second World War. You could have been living during Hurricane Katrina or Maria, and you experienced trauma. So birth trauma is just a life trauma. It isn't bigger or less than a trauma. If you are traumatized by something and that stays in your life, that happens to be your trauma. So you need to honor it. You need to respect it. You need to say, I recognize it. I was traumatized as a man being at the birth of my child. I was traumatized by that. And then you can make a list of how you felt traumatized and how that's impacted. Just getting it out on a list. It's like when we mull over something, we talk to ourselves in our mind. We repeat it over and over again in our mind. But if we say it out loud to somebody, then we hear what it is we're thinking. And often we can go, goodness gracious, I got to modify that a bit. Right? So the same way, make a list of how birth trauma has impacted you as a man, as a human being, as a father, as a partner. Make a list of that. And then you need to understand that what trauma does is it ingrains in us, which means we replay it over and over again. And we know that when we replay things over and over again, they dig deeper into us, both the negative and the positive. So when a child learns to walk, they get up, they fall down, they get up, they fall down, they get up, they get up, they fall down, they get up, they get up, they sit down, they get up, they get up, they move, they fall down. That ingrains in them. So if a child, the first time they get up and they fall down and really, really hurt themselves, they're less likely to have the courage right away to get up again. But if you just bounce down, the kid's going to get back up again. So when you look at that list, try to order them into what's the most traumatic. And then take a look, sort of remove that out of the picture for a moment, take a look at the list, but the ones that are the ones that traumatized you the least, look at them, honor them, and just say to them, I can let go of you. It's okay. It's like when you pay a bill and you don't get the exact change. You don't have to hold on to every bit of trauma, because not getting the exact change is not the same as somebody stealing your identity, right? So it's relative. The big traumas you have to still work with. But if you can get rid of some of the littler traumas, and what happens is your partner often holds on to all of them. She can't distinguish one from the other. And so they all come up. Just get rid of some of them. And then when you have a big trauma, here's another skill that we use. And it's a play acting skill for sure about it, right? And there are different ways to play act, and you can research online for different ways to do it. So these are two ways. that we've done it. One is to sit a chair in front of you and you talk to yourself, but you talking is the man who's overcome the trauma. And the you in the chair is the man who has the trauma. So all of us have wisdoms in us. So when we go back to things that happened to us when we were a child, we had the skills we had then, and we did the best we could then. But you have more skills now. You actually have more skills now than you did at the birth because time's passed. So you get to play act or pretend or make believe. The wisdom that you have as a person who has put perspective into trauma, it may stay with us the rest of our lives. And we want to use it as a maturing and as a gift and not as a way of destroying our lives or destroying our love or destroying our relationships. That doesn't serve anyone's purpose. So just talk to yourself as but you're the one who's going to help your traumatized self get out of this. Some men stay traumatized in birth because they feel they can't heal faster than the woman. This is wrong thinking, very wrong thinking. They feel the woman will blame them for getting over it quicker. They feel that they're not honoring the woman's experience by not holding on to their own trauma as men. That's mistake thinking, both are. Your partner, your baby's mother, needs you to heal if you have been traumatized from the birth. Your baby needs that as well, because your baby doesn't understand this trauma. There has been a lot of fuss and huffle that says that we as people live our lives because we were traumatized at birth. But the reality is that's not accurate. We're traumatized by lots of things. And most of us have no recall about our births. We're not focused on it. And most of us are not traumatized by our birth. We're traumatized by things that we remember, even if we vaguely remember them. So when you hold on to the trauma of your child's birth, then you are imposing something onto that child that child doesn't know about, doesn't need, and doesn't want. They want you to be a whole person and a whole parent and a whole father. So when you have this conversation with your traumatized self, that's your goal, is to heal. You also have a goal to help your children when they grow up, how to deal with trauma. Some trauma can heal quite quickly, others takes a long time. Others live their life traumatized and never live a full life because that trauma stops them every time they want to do something that's joyful. You don't want to do that. So sit down and talk to yourself. Here's another way that, if you know anything about Native Americans, this would be something that some of them would do and other spiritual pathways would do it. And that is to create a journey for yourself. And you can literally make a circle, and around that circle put items that indicate all those things on your list that you're traumatized about. And then walk the circle and stop at each one and have it natter with it. Talk about it. Talk it out. And when you've completed that circle, when you've said absolutely everything that's in your mind and your heart and your emotions, everything, it's all out there. It's all there. There is nothing left inside. It's all there. Then pick some spot on that circle and create a pathway into another circle. And that other circle is your future as you move forward without letting this birth trauma continue to traumatize you. And on that circle, create things that indicate that you're healing, that you're healed, and that you're able to move along. And talk to each one of them. And every time that trauma comes up on that journey, look back to where you all laid it in, and say that's where you belong. It's in the past. I'm living now. I'm going to carry that scar. I'm going to carry that wound, but I'm going to do that with dignity and pride and empowerment. I'm not going to let this control me. And you move through the circle, creating your present and creating the future that will come from the present. Because this is the reality. The past is gone. We can imagine it, as we suggested, learn skills, go back and replay it, but the past is gone. Future hasn't happened. The now is now. However, every moment of the now then becomes the past. So if we're carrying the baggage of our trauma with us, it's our choice. And sometimes we have to make these ceremonies or these commitments. So when you have completed the circle of the present and you see this pathway, you can do one of two things. You can keep that pathway open if you want, or you can close it. And when the trauma comes back as you live your now, you can say to it, I've done the work, I'm doing the work, you're there, the scar's still new, the wound is still new, and I'm moving forward because I deserve it as a human being and as a man and as a father and as a partner. I deserve to move on. This trauma at birth happened. It has impacted my life, it's impacted my baby's life, it's impacted the mother of my baby. And I don't want it to be the basis for our lives. So I'm going to do my very best to heal this trauma and to carry forward the wounds and the scars, but not let them be open wounds that constantly fester. It serves no one. Your partner may not do this for herself. Please listen to the one just before this and think about it. But you as a human being have the right not to have to carry her burden as well as your burden. Society doesn't recognize men in pregnancy and birth, although more and more fathers are being involved in parenting. And yet in childbirth, this transition from being an adult into being a parent, that area is still empty for us. The societal message is for women to make choices and make a birth plan, and for you to support her choices. That's the wrong message. And do you remember what the message was at the beginning? Do you remember what the concept was at the beginning? Because you need to pass this concept on to other fathers, other men, other human beings. You need to just tell them when you're pregnant, it's normal and natural to learn some skills, and then to use those skills to help your partner work through the activity of birthing your baby. And you can do this. You can tell others. That's a simple statement, isn't it? Because she may spend all of her time gathering information. And do you know what you do? You spend your time learning skills. She may not want to learn skills. But if you learn skills, she's going to want you to use them. And she will want to use them as well. Because if she stops coping and she doesn't manage well and she isn't dealing well and handling it isn't really what she's doing and she's not staying on top of anything or feeling in control, then the time you spent as a human being and as a man and as a father-to-be and as a partner, the time you spent learning skills is now going to rise to the fore. And she is going to thank you forever because you can help her cope. She does not have to suffer on your watch. And if they do things to and around her that you don't like or she doesn't like, you don't have to carry that with you. And she doesn't for the rest of your lives. And when you're skilled, she'll be grateful. Because when women are with men at birth and that she knows that you don't have skills and you know you don't have skills, she knows it and she will hold that against you. She doesn't hold her lack of skills against herself, but she's going to hold your lack of skills against you. That's how women think. Because women have been indoctrinated by a message in childbirth, which has gotten stronger since the 80s, which is that birth is all about choices and that they should give you the birth you want. And nobody is telling you to become skilled. And so women don't reach out for skills. And they don't think they're necessary because they're being told over and over and over again that pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events and that women know how to birth. And you just should choose where you want to birth and who you want to be with and what interventions you don't want. But now you know as a man it's an activity. And if you've been at a birth, you know it's an activity. So fill that activity with skills. So that's what you do with birth trauma. You'll always have it, but you don't want it to dominate you. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can go either to our birthingbetter.org website or our commonknowledgetrust.org website and donate. We are registered not-for-profit in New Zealand, and you can like our Facebook page or like our YouTube channel and pass this on if you know men who have been traumatized at birth. We have to change the societal message around childbirth. And you now know what it is, don't you? It's a concept that it's normal and natural to self-learn skills when you're pregnant and then use those skills to work through the activity of birthing your baby. In all births, you get pregnant to have a baby, not a type of birth. And so thank you for listening. Don't hesitate to write any comments that you have. And for goodness sakes, do not go into birth without skills. And for goodness sakes, do not be at a birth without using them. So thanks very much, and I'll see you again with the next video in this series. Bye-bye.